implementation entails assisting passengers who may be transiting through Johannesburg to their final destinations. That means that for those passengers who ordinarily would be flying or traveling on SAA, we will engage with partner airlines in order to get them to be accommodated on those flights for them to travel to their final destinations. But the framework speaks to a number of other areas. These include as well situations where people who are supposed to travel today and are unable to travel, and it is pointless for them to travel today, and then they decide that they will no longer be traveling. They should reach out to the agencies that issued them with their tickets for them to get refunds.
A very good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and SABC Channel 404. I'm your host, Desiree Chauke. The ongoing South African Airways strike seems to be escalating and causing further economic uncertainty for the country as workers continue to down tools over wages and job security. SAA says the strike that's costing in the region of 50 million per day is jeopardizing talks with lenders around much needed funding. Striking unions are also threatening to shut down South Africa's entire aviation industry by extending the strike beyond the state-run SAA. Weekend efforts at the CCMA yielding nothing, and tonight we're asking you the age-old question: should we heed calls to privatize South African Airways? Joining us for this discussion, also actually join us on Facebook and social media on the hashtags SABC News Online and SABC News Unfiltered. But let's welcome our guests tonight. Mr. Lumkile Mondi is a senior lecturer at the Wits School of Economic and Business Sciences. Thanks for coming through. And we also have from the National Union of Mine Workers, Paramile Klubi Majola, and Zazin Zibanyoni Mugambi is the president of the South African Cabin Crew Association, SACA, as well as the SAA interim CFO, Dion Fredericks. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for making the time. As a beginning, something unrelated, Paramila, I'm going to ask you, because your union is also active at Eskom, your reaction about the appointment of a new CEO at Eskom?
Well, for us, it is disappointing. As a union, we're in the process of formulating a detailed response to that. And we will share that with you, but that's what we can say at this stage.
Thank you very much. Dion Fredericks, let's start with you. What's the latest position within SAA with regards to the way forward?
In terms of the way forward, we've previously indicated that we're busy with a long-term turnaround strategy for which there's 5 pillars. So that is what we're trying to do to make sure that we can get SAA to profitability.
Is this the very strategy that's gotten us to where we are at this moment? The long-touted strategy that seemingly hasn't yielded any results?
I think one need to look at it differently. There's been many strategies over the years. However, certain of the key elements were never implemented. You may have a very good strategy, but if you don't implement it, it will not be successful. These things relate to, for example, skills. If you don't have the right skills in the organization, you will be challenging. In terms of our revenue stimulation, where we have closed certain routes that's not profitable. We look at specifically in terms of our technical department. We appointed a new CEO, and we can see there's a change taking place. On the revenue side, we have appointed a new chief commercial officer. We see starting traction in that as well. We've brought in new A350s because we have an old fleet. Just to mention,
just in relation to the strike, we keep throwing around a 50 million number. In real terms, how much has the strike cost you since Friday?
In terms of, if one just look in terms of the projections from a revenue perspective, it's around about 46 million from a revenue perspective.
46 million per day?
Per day. And that, as we would see, that would continue depending on the season. So there's a seasonal effect in terms of that as well, and ultimately that's what we're referring to.
Zazi, the SA Cabin Crew Association announced today that it was in talks with other unions to try and reach out to other airlines so that the strike goes beyond SAA. How far have those talks gone?
I think it's other companies where we organized ourselves and NUMSA. So we have reached out to air chefs. I think at this point we've even served a secondary strike on air chefs. We have done the same at Mango Airlines. We've done the same at Express. So it's well on its way. We believe that this issue is literally of national importance, and we believe that now is the time for some real change to happen at South African Airways.
Just clarify that for us. The companies you're mentioning all impact SAA, not necessarily other airlines.
Well, yes. I mean, Air Chefs impacts SAA. Express, obviously, we're very close, and there's been talks of a merger between ourselves and Express. Mango, of course, is part of the SAA
So the
group.
talks about extending to the entire aviation industry are not necessarily, are you saying that's not really the case?
That is the case.
They are the
Yeah.
case, yeah.
That is the case, if I may just jump in there.
Absolutely.
There are many companies where NUMSA is organized. Companies like Bid Air, companies like Com Air, companies like LSG Sky Chefs. I mean, there's a list of these companies, and we are currently consulting workers about a secondary strike. Com Air, for example, we have a strike certificate. LSG Sky Chefs does airline catering for many airlines, not just SAA. So yes, if this strike continues and our members decide to participate, it is going to have an impact on the aviation sector as a whole.
All right, we're having a conversation about the escalating SAA strike, but that seems, as you've heard just now, might be extending onto other parts of aviation in the country. When we come back, we'll bring in Lumkile Mondi into the conversation to speak about the economic impacts. Let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Why is the board not looking at business rescue?
Apologies if it seems that the sentence was disrespectful. However, it's just to indicate the house is on fire.
The fundamental issue here is that you need to shape up or ship out.
Well, you saw in the beginning there one of our guests today, Mr. Dion Fredericks from SAA. He's the Chief Financial Officer, and we'll continue to have this conversation with him. But let's bring Mr. Lumkile Mondi from the Wits School of Economic and Business Sciences into the conversation. Prince Mashalena, in an article today in the Sowetan, talks about the corruption and incompetence at the SAA, and he says SAA is a smaller manifestation of the grand collapse that is coming. Your thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, I think he's referring to the period that we've had, particularly in the past 10 years, where we've seen collapse of institutions, as we've seen all the Commission of Inquiry, whether it's an agent, it's on the Commission, and various others, as well as prosecution that's taking place at the moment. So is it
correct, though, that that is the problem at SAA?
They would say the problem is historical. Remember, SAA was part of the military-industrial complex around an industrial policy strategy of creating an aviation industry where you build an airline. That airline attracts equipment manufacturers and suppliers of various equipment into the plane and create that capability. We saw that capability was shared with Daniel and other military companies under the Botha regime later in the years, around 1966. So this has been a very excellent asset to have for industrial strategy development, but also then of positioning an apartheid regime as a capable regime, because SAA used to fly everywhere until there were sanctions where you could not fly over certain parts of Africa or couldn't go and land other places. But historically, it's created that capability that we have, that we cannot afford to lose. We need to find a way of how we sort out SAA.
Phakamile, how do we balance the historical issues that Mr. Mondi and Mr. Fredericks are talking about, and this very real problem now that workers are seeking redress?
Well, I think for us as unions, our position has been very clear. Our members are on strike primarily because We are sick and tired of the corruption and looting and the excuses for the continuation of the corruption and looting at SAA. We've been served with Section 189. They intend to retrench close to 1,000 workers. This is probably the third or the fourth time that this has happened. In the last 4 years, this board has actually brought this organization to the brink of collapse. I saw your clip earlier where you Mr. Fredericks was in Parliament painfully trying to explain why they haven't delivered on financial statements. It's a completely unacceptable situation. It's abnormal. In a normal corporation, all of these people would have been fired for their failure, especially in the sense that they've brought us back to this crisis now. And what workers are actually saying this time around is that we reject the idea that we should be the ones to suffer through job losses because of the complete failure of management and the continuation of the corruption and looting which is taking place and is endorsed, as far as we're concerned, by the current board.
Zazi, cabin crew members are at the coal face of the operations at the SAA. How are they affected by all of this?
No, I mean, I myself am a cabin crew member. I've been in South African Airways for a very long time. We've seen people come, we've seen people go. Mr. Fredericks, for example, is new. We've been through it when we had CEOs running away with money, aircrafts being sold and leased back. We have seen it all. And I think there comes a time where cabin crew is saying, and ground staff is saying that we have had enough. As workers, we're not going to bear the brunt for bad decisions made by the board, historically, not just now. And I mean, at some point, workers have decided they're going to stand up for this company that they love. And people cannot continue to loot as we stand by and be retrenched.
Dion, is SAA overwhelmed? Are you feeling, as Aziz says, that you're not necessarily as new management in touch with historical issues that have brought you thus far?
Yeah, I think, and maybe I want to take a different tack. I've been with Telkom for 26 years. We were the year as well. 6 years ago, Telkom had things like dossiers. We made significant losses. And if you don't take the painful medicine, you're not going to change it around. And I agree and I appreciate of everything that was happened. Arriving at SAA, everything is broken. Processes, systems, people, productivity is very low, not the right people in the right positions. If you don't redress that, you will not continue to go forward. What we as management trying to do with the limited skills and resources that we have is at least to try and address certain of the issues. We can't address all the issues. You won't be able to do that. If you have broken an organization in 10 years, it's not going to take 1 or 2 years. If you take the Telkom example, it took 6 years, and today Telkom pays dividends of 800. So it can be done, but we need to put the right people,
processes. But the difference is Telkom management is committed to the process. Are the unions taking the painful medicine?
Well, this is the problem. They talk about painful medicine, except the only people who are taking the pain are the working class. Those who are responsible for causing the pain, for creating the massive financial hole in the form of corrupt executive managers and board members, they've not taken a single dosage of that pain. If you go back to 2015, when we were told, even at that time, that SAA needed to retrench workers in order to save it. There was a 90-point plan which was devised, and I'd like to just read from that plan, because Dion touched on this at the beginning to say that there are things that have been implemented and others that haven't been implemented. This is one of the things that they've consistently failed to implement. An immediate review of all contractual burdens and governance implications or defects within the legal framework of the company. This includes the review of onerous agreements, correction thereof, and other matters that impact the framing of remedial activity, the re-establishment of foundation laying for LTTS implementation within the tight governance environment. It also speaks about dealing with onerous contracts, which are a burden on SAA. As we speak, the 25 billion, let me finish, the 25 billion per annum spend on procurement is SAA's crisis.
Let's
but they
take
want
a break.
to resolve
when we
that
return,
by cutting jobs.
We'll touch back on, we'll go back to procurement processes and how those are problematic. You're watching Unfiltered. Let's take a break.
You'll be well aware of the fact that we have 9.2 billion rands worth of debt that comes due, and we've had to shunt, I would say, from month to month. But our leases on the planes also will be accelerated. So we're not talking about 9 billion rands worth of obligations. We're talking about in excess of 40 billion rands worth of obligations that have to be settled immediately.
Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered, and as usual, we ask you, our viewers, to engage with us on our topic of the day. Let's take a look at some of your tweets. Regs EP saying, if the government has no funds to help SAA, privatization is the only call I think should be made. And a converse or different opinions, Fiso Madlala saying billions of debts to SAA is collapsing because of incapable board and corruption. Privatization of SAA will not solve the problem. SAA needs a new clean face. We must compare apples with apples. Lumkile, should the SAA be privatizing?
So SAA needs a strategic equity partner because government is running huge debt levels at the moment. So in the medium to long term, it cannot sustain SAA should it continue incurring losses. So what's required, we need a big brother, big sister, who's going to come in as a strategic equity partner, who can inject capital into it. And then over time, we can rebuild SAA with a view that it's a public-private partnership. SAA still keeps the brand, but more important also, we use it as a base to create innovation industry. Because it will be very, very sad that over 8 years of capability in the industry, but also of many businesses that have died because SAA was not procuring new planes, was not looking long term, that those linkages have all but disappeared. So in that regard, we may need to have a long-term perspective of never losing a capability of the aviation industry, which we have invested so much in it.
But as an economist, you understand the concept of a business thriving and a business getting to a stage where it needs to fold down. Just play devil's advocate, and if the SAA were to fold, would the economy be able to handle that?
Absolutely. The only problem is that it will destroy capability. So there's no use in a developmental strategy. Why would you create a capability and then destroy it? Yeah. So what I'm saying here is that we're moving into a fourth industrial revolution where South Africa, because it's well endowed with titanium and other minerals, which are very important for the fourth industry. Therefore, that capability we have is going to make us leap and be able to create new planes that fly and new houses that stay in the air. And if we destroy that capability, we lose that opportunity. So we need to think strategically, deal with the issues that my colleagues have raised around corruption, around incompetence, but look at ways as how to balance national interest in terms of making sure that the debt in SAA does not escalate tremendously. We bring in such a security partner and we develop and redevelop SAA's capability with a partner that's got bigger bucks than we can afford at national level.
Dion, before we went to break, Phakamile was raising, it's only but one issue amongst the many issues that are problematic at the SAA, the issue of procurement and how there are those so-called evergreen contracts that can just never come to an end and are really costing the SAA an arm and a leg. Well, what are the conversations around this problem of contracts that seemingly are unregulated and the owners of the contracts can charge whatever they like?
No, we've reviewed most of those contracts, and you understand with big organizations like that, it takes time. We've indicated last year we saved 600 million in terms of those contracts. Many of those contracts had middlemen where you add 10, 20 or 30% where they didn't add value. We've taken from a SAA perspective, all of those have been taken out. There's also 84 contracts that we've identified. Some of the concerned contracts we've given over to the Hawks and the SIU. So it's not like nothing has been done. We actually published that when we went to Parliament, and I can understand there's a frustration that things are not going quickly enough.
Yeah.
However, there are certain actions being taken, and management is open to discuss these things.
Zazi, are you satisfied with the activities that have been taken by management in dealing with these contracts? Because in some way, they affect progression for cabin crew members. If you go in as a cabin crew member, you don't necessarily want to stay a cabin crew member all your life within your working life within SAA.
Yes, but it's baffling what Mr. Fredericks is saying, because to say that they are working on some of them and they have sort of a plan. We are in crisis at South African Airways. If no one realizes that now,
I get a sense that that is not coming through.
No, it really isn't. And this is why we're taking the drastic action. It's not just about the increase. It's about saving this airline. There's no time for some. We have made recommendations in terms of where exactly SAA is losing money. We've brought it to the attention, the 150 above market where Swissport is charging SAA. Why is no one acting on those now? We need quick wins. Hence, we are saying you are refusing to give us an 8%. However, money is walking out in buckets. So it's the principal issue.
You're saying one of the solutions is insourcing.
Well, I mean, we've seen a success on this front already with South African Airways Technical, whose management, in our view, has actually been, I don't want to say progressive, but very, very open to having discussions with us. In fact, we met today, we're meeting again tomorrow. They've been very transparent. They've said, help us to identify areas where we can save costs. We've already done that. At KWE, there was a contract which we said was wasteful expenditure. They've cancelled it. SAAT is saving millions. There's another contract that we're currently working on with them. And this is the kind of commitment we want to see from SAA. And it boggles the mind why this is so difficult for them to actually accede to. Because at the end of the day, it's not the labor costs that are killing SAA. It's the procurement spend.
Will SAA survive this current action?
Will it survive the strike action? We certainly hope so. We hope that management and the board come to their senses. And I think people must also remember that for the first 3 days, it wasn't us. They chose to cancel flights. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's on them. They put literally fuel on the fire by cancelling those flights at a cost of 52 million a day. It would have been cheaper, frankly, to actually negotiate with labour around wages than to take such a decision.
Okay, we're speaking to Dion Fredericks from SAA. We're speaking to Pagamile Majola, and we're also talking to Zazi Sibanyoni Mugambi, and we're also talking to Lumkile Mondi in a conversation about SAA. Let's say goodbye to our SABC3 viewers. If you'd like to continue with the conversation, join us on SABC channel 404. Let's see you on the other side.
$3,000 forensic reports from just 7 or 8 SOEs. So far, an estimated 600 million rands has been identified as collectible and due to the state.
Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered, and we're continuing with our conversation about trying to find a solution for the stalemate at SAA. One of the big stories we're carrying this morning, Pagamile, is that the SAA CEO saying that it's untrue that unskilled people are manning some of the high security areas within the SAA, and you coming out and saying actually you're not going to apologize for saying that. And the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises, Khaya Magaqa, has said that it's reckless to go out and tell the public that your members who are safety officers and technicians are on strike. Therefore, the SAA can't be claiming that those positions are held by credible employees. Your thoughts?
Well, I think for us, we were within reason to say that because it is a fact. Our membership is made up of, in SACA, for example, you've got cabin crew members who are safety officers who are skilled in CPR. They've got special skills for emergencies. You've got
the requisite skills for operating flights.
For emergencies on the flights, not for operating flights. We were clear. We said for handling emergencies on the flights. You've got technicians whose job it is to repair and maintain planes. They're on strike. Even the safety trainers that SAA management was talking about yesterday, they're on strike with us. So we had every right to raise safety concerns because of the fact that we know that you've got a large bulk of the workforce that is on strike. We also know that SAA is depending on learners or newly appointed employees who don't have enough working experience. Many of them work under supervision. Yeah. And so we, again, you know, it was well within our rights to raise that issue. But I think it's also important that people must remember that long before we made that comment, the corrupt board of SAA has done the work of destroying the reputation of this airline. This used to be one of the best airlines in the world, but because of their consistent refusal to do the work of rooting out corruption, of dealing with the bloated procurement spend, this airline is literally going down the drain. SAA Technical even has been affected by that. They are on the brink of losing a contract with Comair because they are unable to meet the demands because of corruption. So this cannot be placed at our doorstep. Yep. It goes right back to management and the board.
Dion, the public is curious. Take us through the thought process that brought you to the decision of grounding the flights instead of further engaging the unions.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I first need just to address. One can keep on looking in the rear mirror and you won't move forward. And it's concerning that we're doing that. In terms of the one word that I never heard in everything is customer. Our first priority was our customer, to make sure if we're not able to fly, that we inform.
But customer can't be only priority. Workers are also a very big stakeholder within operations.
I totally agree with that. However, if the customer don't pay, there's no business. And it was important for us to make sure that the customers have sufficient time if the unions are on strike and we can't take off, that they can make alternative arrangements.
Do you agree, though, that this problem is not about customer paying or not paying? SAA customers do pay. The problem, over and over again, seemingly, is corruption and bad management.
I would agree. There was corruption previously, and we're looking and starting to root that out. If you look currently, the current status of SAA, any business, if your revenue is lower than your costs, you don't have a business.
It's not a business.
That's the current status. So ultimately, let's address this 150%. I actually looked at it. It will cost us 450 million just to insource because of the capital requirements. And I would like the union to come and discuss it with me.
But it's costing you more to outsource.
No, it's not. I can prove to them, I have a list of probably 4 or 5 items that they listed that I looked at today. That's not the case. It's easy to make these broad statements.
Are the different parties getting their information from different places? Zazi?
I mean, firstly, I'm surprised that he's saying that corruption, I must address that they're acting on corruption today. Recently, there's been an internal investigation report that directly implicates the chairperson of the board, and no one is acting on it. So we mustn't say things. The current Tandeka Mkotuso, and we have been at pains to get this to be actioned, or someone to act on this particular report, or at least suspend, like any other employee, and investigate and see whether it's true or not. Yeah. So we believe that comment is untrue, and they need to start really acting on corruption from the board. No one should be intimidated. Just because you're a chairperson of the board does not mean you must not be held accountable. So the issues where Mr. Frederick
But there's also a sense from Dion that the workers are being impatient.
No. We are not. We've been more than patient. I mean, if you can remember, I mean, SACA did a press conference, I think, in 2016. I sat here with you, Lumkile, when we raised the issues of corruption. It is 2019 today. NUMSA has court application after court application talking about delinquency from the board. So we have not been sitting and just waiting as things unfolded. We have been taking active steps. SACA went as far as to open up a police case with the South African police to say, act on corruption. But
which is what management should have done.
Yes, it's not our role.
What was your initial response when you heard that SAA, in response to your strike action threat, was grounding flights?
Well, it was
Were you
truly
surprised?
disappointing because it showed us that this board and management were not committed to finding a way forward that didn't involve crippling the airline. We've always been open to engagement. We would have actually preferred to negotiate rather than to go on strike. But as Zazi put it, we have done absolutely everything. I mean, even on the point of the court applications, NUMSA has spent a lot of money. We went to court twice, the South Gauteng High Court, to force the South African Airways Board to implement forensic reports. And do you know that they fought us? We won in court and they took the money that they don't have. They spent it to fight us in an appeal.
Jan, is the SAA being vindictive? Are you cutting your nose to spite your face?
No, I don't think so at the end of the day. I think it's important to put things in perspective. And the concern is that it's not being put in perspective at the end of the day. We actually requested, when we tried to negotiate with the unions, we asked to them on Tuesday to speak to us, they said they can't. We tried to speak to them on Wednesday, they say can't. The evening we spoke to them, they say they will take the new proposal. The initial proposal on the table was, we can't tell you when we will pay you. We then make new proposal that we can pay in March because we don't have funds. We have to procure the funds, but the union didn't want to look at that. We asked them also, defer the strike with 1 day. They refused. So ultimately it comes back to what I said earlier. Because of that we said...
But isn't that the point to negotiations? They don't necessarily have to agree to your solutions.
I agree.
It's engagement, isn't it?
I agree. But if you have the sword over my head and say, within 48 hours I'm going to strike, I'm going to ground you, I'm going to impact your... currently I'm trying to raise 2 billion rand of funds from lenders. Lenders look and say, okay, what is happening now?
Lumkile, is it telling that government, senior government areas where answers should be coming out, has been essentially quiet about this very important event in the country?
Well, I mean, government does not believe that when a crisis at a macro level, with an economy growing at 0.5%, with job shedding taking place across many financial institutions, across retail areas. Yep. So for SAA, who is a microcosm of the bigger problem, why would we believe that things are a crisis? Remember that most of the people in the cabinet were sitting and watching this show playing itself. In the testimony in the Zondo Commission by Barbara Hogan about how Zuma moved her out of the position, and the subsequent appointment of Malusi Kigaba to try and deal with SAA amongst other issues. So the story has been done at the top, and no one has dealt with it. It's like it never happened, nothing happened at all.
How does it affect the current president's efforts?
Well, the president has got his hands tied because it's a compromise among the ANC factions, and therefore we are where we are today. Workers are the ones that are feeling the brunt. So you've got workers feeling the brunt. You've got those communities that SABC was showing last week at local level in the Free State, how people have completely been dispossessed of any humanity that they have under ANC.
Because someone wanted to buy a mansion somewhere.
Absolutely.
All right.
So this is a crisis that's self-made, and if they don't deal with it, workers are going to deal with it as they're arguing now.
Let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
We must call upon the Special Investigative Unit and the National Prosecuting Authority to expedite investigation and prosecute all those implicated.
State-owned entities are archaic in their design and they should not be used for economic development.
Is it not time, Honourable Minister, that we cut our losses and consider public-private partnership in these state-owned entities?
There you see it, the SAA, a constant conversation in Parliament. And some of our viewers today, Mteteleli, saying SAA bosses and their handlers obviously want to privatize the airline. When NUMSA and SACA announced the SAA strike, SAA management decided to ground aircrafts instead of at least interdicting the strike. Also the fact that out of plus minus 8 forensic reports, SAA management didn't act on any. Welcome once again, and let's continue with this conversation on how we're trying to find solutions for the SAA situation. Mr. Fredericks, what's the way forward?
Yeah, I think it's, if we look in terms of what we're saying, you can't privatize until you stabilize the organization. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. The second part is, as I said earlier, we have identified 84 contracts.
Let me ask you, for argument's sake, your current management, and you're looking at the historical trajectory of efforts to stabilize the SAA, and previous management haven't been able to get it right. What have you got in your toolbox that will bring about a different outcome?
If we take just one example, we appointed a new CEO at SAT. One of the checks used to take 65 days. They have implemented a new process with lean focus, and it took 34 days where they had a target. So there's specific interventions that taking place.
And this is to suppliers?
This is to repairs to make sure that aircraft get out of the hangar as soon as possible. We also,
what emphasis are you giving, if at all, to workers?
In terms of workers, what we have done now is to identify where, in which areas do we require specific skills, how we can support those skills internally. We've also focused on...
Is there a skills shortage?
There is a skills shortage. It's always, the two biggest challenges in SAA was leadership and management. We started to bringing that in based on that, and I mentioned the technical example. You can see it with most of the employees that were there previously, there's a significant difference taking place. So if you get the right skills in, if you get the right leadership, if you get the right management, if you start doing consequent management, which we're starting to do, you will get that right.
Zazi, how are cabin crew members lacking in terms of skills? How are you adding value to the SAA?
I think cabin crew are very skilled, and I think if they do a proper skills audit and actually start a process of developing the crew members in order to fill those key positions, we'll do that. But I have to say this, we had a very skilled CEO by the name of Mr. Vuyani Jahana, who just wanted support from the shareholder, which he did not get. I think under his leadership, we all had an understanding of where we are going. There was a buy-in from the employees at large. We understood the focus. We understood that he was dealing with corruption, so we could support if we were to say, you know, Labour, just can we work this out in this particular manner? We are right behind him. But unfortunately, it's difficult to be behind a board and leadership that firstly we don't trust, that is not willing to deal with corruption. What they say to us...
So essentially you're asserting that they took him out to continue with the corruption?
It appears so, because how do you remove... Don't even give him a chance to serve out his notice. What was the hurry? Could he not hand over? Was it such a bad relationship? It wasn't for South African Airways, we feel. So in terms of leadership, they clearly don't want good, effective leadership in South Africa. Actually, they're willing to pay.
But one would argue that Mr. Jahana himself was given a difficult time at the SAA. Paramile?
Well, I think, you know, for example, Mr. Jahana worked very closely with us when it came to dealing with corruption. He actually requested that we halt some of our processes because we had put so much pressure on them that he made the decision to appoint Vusi Pikoli to deal with that aspect, those investigations and the NPA investigations, was because we as unions were really putting them under the fire on that. And so because we saw progress in that respect, and also because of the fact that he developed a turnaround strategy which did not depend on a government bailout and had the support of the private sector, we were willing to work with him. He indicated that he was going to do his best to ensure that whatever turnaround strategy was devised would have either no job shedding or minimal job shedding at best. And so this was why workers were excited under his leadership, because we could see progress. So it is one of those decisions that to this day, no one can actually properly explain. Here we are sitting discussing SAA, its financial problems. The public is complaining about a bailout, and yet the one person who had a viable turnaround strategy that didn't depend on the state is out. So for us, the message as workers is that it's clear that this government is actually not interested in dealing with corruption. There's obviously another agenda that has, which is detrimental to us, which they're trying to implement.
Actually, following up on that, where your initial demand was an 8% salary increase and a halt to retrenchments, what is the conversation now that the SAA has decided to halt flights?
Well, what we can say now is that there have been some recent developments. I can't go into too much detail, but what we can say is that we're in conversation with the Minister of the Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, and we are scheduling a meeting for tomorrow, and we are hoping that this intervention will yield the kind of results that we're hoping for. I think it's important that your viewers must understand that for us, this strike has never been just about wages, because if it was, we would have settled long ago. We would never even have gone on strike. This has been about a change in behavior. This has been about consequence management for those who continue, even today, to loot the airline. And what we want is we want very specific timelines and guarantees about that. Because you see, if we can't secure that, that wage agreement is going to fall apart. It's not going to be sustainable. The airline within 6 months will collapse, and workers will find themselves back in the situation that they're in today.
Actually, if we work for free, the airline will still not
collapse.
So it takes zero and work for free, absolutely no salary at this point. SAA won't survive.
Won't survive. So until you deal with the crisis of the corrupt procurement spend, which is still continuing, I might add, there's not going to be any change at South African Airways.
Dion, let's talk about that 5.5 billion cash injection that was advanced to SAA. What kind of cost items you're spending it on to try and revive the airline? And let's also talk about the report that some lines, especially continental routes, will be opened from tomorrow. Is that the case? How are you going to do it when the unions are saying, but our workers who are skilled are on strike? Who are you going to be using to operate these flights?
I think first 3.5 of the 5.5 billion was used to pay debt. 2 was for working capital, which we indicated previously, which excluded increases at the end of the day. I just want to rectify in terms of the flight that took off yesterday. The normal flight, people were scheduled on that flight. No new people were brought in. 2 of those people were intimidated. They were taken off the flight because they didn't feel comfortable. And we had normal standby SAA staff, not staff from external,
so non-unionized workers are working?
There are unionized and non-unionized workers that's working. So we're taking the matter further. We have issued a demand to the unions to address the issue out there. Ultimately, what we're doing is to make sure that we have gone to such an extent now. I've implemented what I call the war room in the finance, that we looked at every line of cost item to address, to make sure if it's not required, we will stop it at the end of the day. In terms of the fraud, we've indicated previously, there's 84 contracts that's waiting for a presidential proclamation. The moment that happens, then they can go into people's bank accounts. We don't have the authority to do that. So we need to understand the processes as well. And ultimately, we will get to the bottom of this.
So you're resuming operations as well?
We have sufficient staff to fly international. We have flew yesterday with any hiccups. One of the aircraft was 35 minutes late.
Is it safe for travelers?
It is safe. We had our pilots indicated. The pilots is not on strike. The cabin crew that previously served customers are serving the customers now. And based on the fact that there's additional staff coming back. We're also looking at regional flights that we start tomorrow. It's not people from outside or people that we're taking from the street.
So Dion is talking about additional staff coming back. You're talking about extending the conversation to other flight service providers and other unions. Where's the middle ground here?
You know what? It's not about it's not a competition about how many flights, who's not taking off. We actually just want to talk and find solutions. For a way forward, and as Pagamile has indicated.
I suspect so does the nation.
Yes, and we are here, we are willing to talk. It's unfortunate the mediation didn't go as planned. We actually wasted a day. What happened with the mediation? Well, we had issues around unions that were not on strike, that wanted to participate. That took half the day. The other half of the day, we literally waited until we gave our proposal, and we were told, that's it, we'll call you.
Okay.
Today, we're still waiting for a call.
Let's take a look at some tweets that have come through this evening, just contributing to our conversation. Nati Janchi saying, truly speaking, the unions just baffles me. They know the situation, they knew the situation during Umamiene's time. Why didn't they speak out then? And this applies to all SOE unions, should speak out more about corruption. This is an embarrassment to a black people-led government. Really? After 25 years? That's Nati's position there. Let's take a look at another one. BK Sibanda saying, we must never fall for that rhetoric. Here's what needs to happen tomorrow. 1, forensic investigations. Dion says they're currently underway. 2, identify culprits and press charges. 3, fire who needs to be fired and hire who needs to be hired. And 4, hire the board and get competent people. That's simple enough. Why isn't it happening, Dion? Actually, these are your closing comments, because we're running out of time.
I think some of those happen. I think the strike was only on one issue, on wages, and additional things coming on. We currently, the minister is looking at strengthening the board. As I've already indicated, we're strengthening the management. Certain people has been fired, some left before they could be fired.
Just a quick one. Is this labor action enough to close SAA down?
Yes, it is. I think ultimately I'm struggling to find the 2 billion. If we don't get the 2 billion, the airline will close. And I've presented 3 times to the union. At the last time they said to me, we're not interested in the finances. If you look at the 8%, and remember it's compound, over 3 years it's going to cost us 250 million. Just the difference between the 5.8, 5.9 and 8%, 250 million rand, which we don't have at this stage.
Way forward?
What Dion is talking about, the 8%. We have a group of employees, the pilots, that were paid a 5.9 of a very high salary. If you do the mathematics, generous benefits, and their increase actually would cost. There's 600 pilots would cost almost as similar as 3,000 employees.
Way forward quickly.
So I mean, we're here. We want to talk. There's obviously progress in that front. We are not unreasonable. We just want an SAA that's going to work.
Way forward.
Well, first of all, I think let's just be honest, you know, SAA management has not done enough to root out corruption as we speak. What they do is they recycle corrupt managers. Malola Piri, who was the acting CEO of SAAT, yes, I'm giving you a way forward because it's important that your viewers know this, that they continue to be executives who have been implicated in corruption, who are recycled in the organization and placed in different positions. This is why workers are so angry. They're not being honest when they say they're dealing with corruption. The same corruption that was there 10 years ago is existing even today.
Let me get a bigger picture. Way forward.
The way forward is South Africa is in an economic crisis. Specifically, its own entities are in a crisis, such as SAA, ESCOM, and many others. Therefore, we need leadership. I think the president and his cabinet need to show us a way forward as how we come out of the mess, which the ANC, in fact, in the past 25 years has created. They need to fix it.
Again, let me thank all of our guests for coming through tonight. Fascinating conversation, but obviously time constraints, time not on our side. We asked you this evening, should we heed calls to privatize South African Airways? 62% of you agree, and 38% say no, it shouldn't be privatized. Thanks again for joining us here on Unfiltered for this conversation on South African Airways. Join us again next week for yet another current topic. Goodbye. you.